Kevin McCarthy has a rare quality for a Republican House Speaker. Among the various reassessments of Kevin McCarthy following his successful debt ceiling negotiations, the one with the widest implications belongs to Matthew Continetti, who writes in the Washington Free Beacon that McCarthy's superpower is his desire to be Speaker. He likes and wants his job. If you hadn't followed American politics across the last few decades, this would seem like a peculiar statement. What kind of House Speaker wouldn't want the job? But part of what's gone wrong with American institutions lately is the failure of important figures to regard their positions as ends unto themselves. Congress, especially, has been overtaken by what Yuval Levin of the American Enterprise Institute describes as a platform mentality, where ambitious House members and senators treat their offices as places to stand and be seen, as talking heads, movement leaders, future presidents, rather than as roles to inhabit and opportunities to serve. On the Republican side, this tendency has taken several forms, from Newt Gingrich's yearning to be a great man of history, to Ted Cruz's ambitious grandstanding in the Obama years, to the emergence of Trump-era performance artists like Marjorie Taylor Greene. And the party's congressional institutionalists, from dealmakers like John Boehner to policy mavens like Paul Ryan, have often been miserable-seeming prisoners of the talking heads, celebrity brands and would-be presidents. This dynamic seemed likely to imprison McCarthy as well, but he's found a different way of dealing with it. He's invited some of the bomb throwers into the legislative process, trying to turn them from platform seekers into legislators by giving them a stake in governance, and so far he's been rewarded with crucial support from figures like Greene and Thomas Massie, the quirky Kentucky libertarian. And it's clear that part of what makes this possible is McCarthy's enthusiasm for the actual vote counting, hand-holding work required of his position, and his lack of both Gingrichian egomania and get-me-out-of-here impatience. But McCarthy isn't operating in a vacuum. The Biden era has been good for institutionalism generally, because the president himself seems to understand and appreciate the nature of his office more than Barack Obama ever did. As my colleague Carlos Lozada noted on our podcast this week, in both the Senate and the White House, Obama was filled with palpable impatience at all the limitations on his actions. This showed up constantly in his negotiation strategy, where he had a tendency to use his own office as a pundit's platform, lecturing the GOP on what they should support and thereby alienating Republicans from compromise in advance. Whereas Biden, who actually liked being a senator, is clearly comfortable with quiet negotiation on any reasonable grounds, which is crucial to keeping the other side invested in a deal. And he's comfortable, as well, with letting the spin machine run on both sides of the aisle, rather than constantly imposing his own rhetorical narrative on whatever bargain Republicans might strike. The other crucial element in the healthier environment is the absence of what Cruz brought to the debt ceiling negotiations under Obama, the kind of sweeping maximalism, designed to build a presidential brand, that turns normal horse trading into an existential fight. Expecting that kind of maximalism from Republicans, some liberals kept urging intransigence on Biden long after it became clear that what McCarthy wanted was more in line with previous debt ceiling bargains. But McCarthy's reasonability was sustainable because of the absence of a leading Republican senator playing Cruz's absolutist part. Instead, the most notable populist Republican elected in 2022, J.D. Vance, has been busy looking for deals with populist Democrats on issues like railroad safety and bank executive compensation, or adding a constructive amendment to the debt ceiling bill even though he voted against it, as though he, no less than McCarthy, actually likes and wants his current job. One reason for the diminishment of Cruz-like grandstanders is the continued presence of Donald Trump as the G.O.P.'s personality-in-chief, to whose eminence no senator can reasonably aspire. At least through 2024, it's clear the only way that Trump might be unseated is through the counter-programming offered by Ron DeSantis, who is selling himself, well, see with what success, as the candidate of governance and competence. No bigger celebrity or demagogue is walking through that door. So for now there's more benefit to legislative normalcy for ambitious Republicans, and less temptation toward the platform mentality, than there would be if Trump's part were open for the taking. Whatever happens, it will be years until that role comes open. In which case Kevin McCarthy could be happy in his job for much longer than might have been expected by anyone watching his tortuous ascent. Kevin McCarthy has a rare quality for a Republican House Speaker. Among the various reassessments of Kevin McCarthy following his successful debt ceiling negotiations, the one with the widest implications belongs to Matthew Continetti, who writes in the Washington Free Beacon that McCarthy's superpower is his desire to be Speaker. He likes and wants his job. If you hadn't followed American politics across the last few decades, this would seem the United States can no longer assume that the rest of the world is on its side. As I was following Turkey's recent general election, I was stunned to hear one of the country's top officials, Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu, speaking to a crowd from a balcony. Jubilant, he promised that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan would wipe away whoever causes trouble for Turkey, and that includes the American military. Earlier, Soylu declared that those who pursue a pro-American approach will be considered traitors. Keep in mind that Turkey has been a member of NATO, with U.S. bases in the country, for about 70 years. Erdoğan often uses stridently anti-Western rhetoric himself. About a week before the election's first round, he tweeted that his opponent won't say what he promised to the baby-killing terrorists or to the Western countries. Erdoğan might be one of the most extreme representatives of this attitude, but he is not alone. As many commentators have noted, most of the world's population is not aligned with the West in its struggle against Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And the war itself has only highlighted a broader phenomenon. Many of the largest and most powerful countries in the developing world are growing increasingly anti-Western and anti-American. When Brazil elected Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to the presidency last October, many heaved a sigh of relief that the mercurial populist Jair Bolsonaro had been replaced by a traditional and familiar left-of-center figure. Yet in his few months in office, Lula has chosen to pointedly criticize the West, rage against the hegemony of the dollar, and claim that Russia and Ukraine are equally to blame for the war. This week, he hosted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, whose brutal reign has led millions to flee his country. Lula lavished praise on the dictator and criticized Washington for denying Maduro's legitimacy and imposing sanctions on his regime. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa had a reputation as a practical, business-friendly moderate who had strong ties with the West. But South Africa under him has veered closer to the Russian and Chinese orbit. The country has refused to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has hosted the Russian and Chinese navies for joint exercises, and now stands accused by the United States of supplying arms to Russia, allegations that South Africa has denied. And then there is India, which has made clear from the start of the Ukraine war that it had no intention of siding against Russia, which remains the chief supplier of advanced weaponry for the Indian military. India's statements about its desire to maintain a balance in its relations between the West and Russia, and even China, have been so numerous that Ashley J. Tellis, one of the most respected scholars on U.S.-India relations, wrote an essay warning Washington not to assume that New Delhi would side with it in any future crisis with Beijing.